As you well know, Chairman Spratt, Ranking Member Ryan, and myself serve on the President's Fiscal Responsibility Commission. You testified at our first meeting. At our second meeting, we received testimony from Dr. Carmen Reinhardt at the University of Maryland, who presented, I believe, the most exhaustive study of debt crises that I'm aware of, covering 44 nations over 200 years. She has come across with the conclusion through her study that when nations have a debt to GDP ratio of 90%, that they will actually lose economic growth. Her study says, I believe the average, I believe it was the mean, was 1 percentage point. So if your economic growth was averaging 3%, it would fall by a third to 2%. I think her study also showed that in the U.S., that in our nation's history, we actually have received negative economic growth at those points where debt to GDP has reached 90%. By a back-of-the-envelope calculation, gross debt in the U.S. to GDP is now 89%. I know debt held by public, I believe, is closer to 60%. My question is, are you familiar with the professor's study? Are you familiar with her conclusions? Do you agree or disagree?
I am familiar with her study, and I would say that her book with Ken Rogoff on debt crises and financial crises is an extraordinary piece of work that includes analyses of, as you say, dozens of crises. On this particular issue, I agree with the general point that as debt increases, interest rates increase. That tends to make investment more costly. Tax rates go up.
But I'm sorry, since time is limited, specifically gross debt to GDP of 90%, where essentially we're at that tipping point now. Do you believe that the U.S. is at a tipping point with respect to its debt?
I don't think there's anything magic about 90%. However, I do think that if we were to go out as, say, the CBO's alternative scenario projects, then debt and interest payments are going to get explosive in 10 or 15 years. And so I think we are close to a situation where we need to be paying very close attention to our fiscal sustainability.
In your testimony, you speak about the European leaders. I think in your written testimony, quote unquote, European leaders have put in place a number of strong measures. Countries under stress have committed to address their fiscal problems. I think it was yesterday, perhaps the day before, the new Prime Minister of the UK said the state of Britain's finances were, quote, even worse than we thought, and warned of, quote, painful and unavoidable cuts. Germany's Chancellor Merkel was quoted as saying Germany faces, quote, serious difficult times. They announced a rather sizable group of spending cuts to deal with their spending crisis, which she said were necessary for the future of our country. When I look at Germany's deficit to GDP ratio, the UK's deficit to GDP ratio, it seems to be comparable to our own. When I look at their debt to GDP ratio of Germany and the UK, again, it appears to be comparable to our own in dealing with gross debt. I'm just curious, do you appear to be complimenting the European leaders for taking strong stands, yet do you see similar strong stands being taken by this particular Congress to rein in the debt?
Well, countries have different amounts of fiscal capacity, if you will. Countries like Greece, which are clearly being shut out from the market because of their debt and deficit ratios, need immediate and sharp changes in their position. The United States, as I said in my remarks, is favored in that we are a safe haven currency, we are a large diversified economy, and we have a long record of paying our debts and paying our interest. So we have a little more breathing space, potentially, but I don't know exactly how much we have, and what I'm just trying to say, and I don't think I'm disagreeing with you, is that we need a program for returning our trajectory of fiscal policy to a sustainable
Chairman
path.
Bernanke, my seconds are ticking away. Real quickly, hopefully it's a yes or no question. I thought I've heard you testify before that not only is it important to the long-term sustainability that we have a program to deal with our debt, but it's actually important to economic growth today to send the signal that we have a plan in place. Did I understand you correctly?
You
It's
did.
important to have a plan today.
A plan in place will help keep interest rates down and help growth be stronger in the near term.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Doggett.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Chairman. There is